Welcome to Silberman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, episode 18, where we talk legal news and practical law. My name is Phil Silberman, your host and owner of the firm. I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Black, who works in our Dallas office. How are you doing today, Austin?
Struggling through the allergies here in Dallas during the beginning of the summer, but we're making it through. So
you can't sound worse than I am. I'm a little under the weather, so if the listeners hear my voice a bit different, that is why. And we've also had some apocalyptic weather in Houston move through, like 100-mile-an-hour winds with trees down. What's on our docket today, Mr. Black?
First, in our legal news section, we're going to be talking about an American tourist dealing with a potential 12-year prison sentence in the Turks and Caicos for possession of ammunition. I don't know if I would necessarily think traveling with purely ammunition would get me in trouble. It apparently did get this guy in trouble. And then moving on to Drake in a song in his rap beef with Kendrick Lamar, he utilized an AI of Tupac's voice on his song. And the state of Tupac is not too happy about that. And then on our legal questions, we'll be discussing whether or not cops are allowed to lie to you. And then can you sue your spouse, particularly for a partition action to divide a house or something like that? Can you do it? We'll let you know. And then finally, our rant and rave section is going to be about dumb tattoos.
We normally have a lot of random stuff on the show, but I think this episode may take the cake for unrelated randomness of the things we're talking about. I think I could summarize it as guns, rappers, cops, suing your wife or your husband or your spouse, and stupid tattoos. That being said, let's go ahead and kick it off with our legal news section. And the first thing we're talking about is this American tourist. His name is Ryan Watson from Oklahoma, and he was taking a trip with his wife to Turks and Caicos. It's a set of islands in the Caribbean, north of Haiti, Dominican Republic, east of the Bahamas. It was a British colony. It's still under the crown, although practically speaking, they have their own government. The incident occurred on April 12, 2024. The couple was preparing to return home to Oklahoma, and he had a Ziploc plastic bag with some bullets in it, some ammunition, right? And there was nothing nefarious going on. He's a hunter. He just forgot they were in the bag. They take him into custody. They have a court appearance for him and his wife. They let the wife go. They end up charging him with illegal possession of ammunition, and they drop the charges against the wife. They prosecute him, still prosecuting him. And Watson's defense from Oklahoma was he was just unaware, and it was, I quote, bonehead mistake, obviously, right? Despite his claims, they take possession of firearms, possession of ammunition very serious in the Turks and Caicos. The U.S. Embassy, which I guess the closest one is in the Bahamas, if you go to their page, they've got this big thing in red that says, do not take ammunition to the Turks and Caicos. Don't do it. They have severe, crazy penalties. There's been similar incidents that have occurred there. I think they've got another American who was detained, and they gave that person 8 months for possession of ammunition in 2023. Now, Mr. Watson is getting 12 years, so I don't know how they go from 8 months to 12 years, but they take it really seriously.
And briefly, that's a good point, though. Like, for anyone traveling, if you don't know this, looking up the country you're traveling to on the U.S. Secretary of State's website is very helpful to see any travel warnings or anything you may not know about it.
Yeah, and before we go too much further into this thing, I'll say this. We're in Texas, okay? A lot of my buddies, they hunt. We hunt and we fish in Texas. I'm not a big hunter. I'm not a big fisher. But they go on these hunting trips, okay? You go to places like Argentina to shoot dove or quail or something like that. You go to Mexico. You go to all these places all over the world. Maybe you're taking guns. Maybe you're taking ammunition. Maybe you're buying it there. You need to have a separate non-hunting suitcase or bag. Okay, so you don't even get into this issue. So when you're going to hunt, have your hunting bag. When you're going to a tourist destination with your wife, and if you're going out of the country, alarm bells should be going off. What do I have in this bag that may be a problem?
When I travel, and I think when a lot of people travel, before I go to the airport or something, I'm double, triple checking. Do I have any water? Do I have any containers of liquid in my bag that can't get on the airplane? So I'm very confused as to how someone could just randomly have ammunition in their bag and not be thinking. It just seems strange to me. But
It happened. And I'm going to tell you, stupidity and negligence in my mind is not a reason to give someone 12 years in custody.
Oh, absolutely.
And this really is a tragedy. They take this stuff very seriously in Turks and Caicos. And we have a quote from a resident, and this was from Reddit. Austin, can you read us that quote from that resident that's on Reddit?
Yeah. So we do not have the Second Amendment here. Guns are heavily restricted here, and we take them seriously. We do not share America's views on them, and do not think that just anybody should be able to get them. So misplacing and forgetting that you just have some bullets laying around looks very irresponsible and negligent to us. We are in between waves of increasing gun violence and murders right now. As more and more guns and ammo make their way on the island, the worst and fastest those waves are hitting. I think it's trying to say that there are just more waves of gun violence and murders. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what Mr. Watson is going to be facing. That's the mentality of jurors in Turks and Caicos if this thing is prosecuted. But here's what the most interesting thing about that is to me. They have the strictest, most severe gun laws probably in the world. They have no Second Amendment rights. They have no right to bear arms. All of their laws are against gun ownership and firearm ownership. Yet they have increased waves and instances of gun violence. So what's the point of having all the laws to restrict the guns if it's not actually helping in these places? And that's my kind of point here. If you hear all this stuff in America where take the guns away from people, amend the Constitution, get rid of the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, because that will make America safer. I always say, no, it won't. If criminals want to get guns, just like in Turks and Caicos, the criminals that want to get the guns will get them. And then all the law-abiding citizens will not have guns. That's how this works. So this is an anecdotal quote. They're still having lots of gun violence, so the laws aren't helping. Let that be a lesson.
I'm sure Mr. Watson being put in prison for 12 years saves many lives in the Turks and Caicos from the few rounds of ammunition he had in his bag.
And their primary economy is tourism and offshore financing. So the tourism I get, this obviously putting Americans in prison for 12 years is not going to help the tourism. As far as the offshore financial services go, those are mostly crooked business people, mafia members, like having offshore accounts where they don't want to be caught and people trying to evade taxes. I think that's how that works. Or at least that's what the IRS thinks. So there are some people here in the country trying to help Mr. Watson. We have 3 governors, Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma, Republican, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Democrat, and Glenn Youngkin, Republican of Virginia, all wrote letters to the governor of Turks and Caicos saying, hey, reconsider the charges. We understand and respect your laws, but in the interest of real justice and mercy, please give this guy a break. Now, what would the Biden administration say? I mean, nothing. Mum's the word from the Biden administration. No help for Mr. Watson. Probably politically inconvenient to try to help someone that's in a dire situation on ammunition charges, but nothing from the Biden administration trying to help this guy. So if you get, caught somewhere and you've got some guns or firearms, good luck getting help from the Biden administration. But if you're a marijuana smoking or using WNBA basketball player, I do think we'll trade for you.
And yes, I'm sure that definitely does happen. I'm super surprised by this, to be honest, because I wasn't aware that the U.S. had a bad relationship with the Turks and Caicos, and this almost seems like we do.
I don't think we do. I just think that it's a country that says, hey, we have laws. People can be very rigid about these kinds of things.
So, of course, this is just like Singapore. Yeah. Singapore is a big example of that, yeah.
And they're the little brother, and the United States is the big brother, and they want, hey, we're a country too. We want people to respect our laws. And we get that. But this is injustice. This is just punishing someone who's a father of 2 for the sake of punishing him to make a point. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Watson and see if he can get any help. And obviously my heart goes out to the family and those little children that may be without a dad for quite some time because of this type of situation. But all right, let's move on to our next story. And Austin, I'm going to lean on you heavily for this one. Okay. Drake's controversial revival of Tupac sparks AI legal debate. Now, let me set this up. This is what I know. Drake is a rapper, and he's got some sort of feud with another rapper by the name of Kendrick Lamar, and then somehow Taylor Swift gets involved in this deal. But he does a new song, and he uses AI to replicate Tupac. For our listeners out there, Tupac was a famous rapper from the 90s. He was murdered, very iconic rapper, and he uses AI to replicate Tupac's voice. And part of the song is Tupac's AI voice, and the song is released. And there's stuff about Taylor Swift, and there's stuff about feuding with Kendrick Lamar, and that's what goes on. So take it from there, Austin. Do you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So Drake was trying to this was like a little bit deeper into it. They had already exchanged some back and forth before this with some songs, and it was a dumb dispute. Like at the beginning, they were all just talking about like Kendrick trying to say Drake isn't black, and then Drake saying that Kendrick is doing music for like Taylor Swift and Maroon 5 and stuff like that, right? A very big song that Kendrick was on is with Taylor Swift, and that's what this song is about, the joke on that. And then in here, Drake attempts to use the AI voice of Tupac, and it did not go over well at all to anyone. And
what do you think about that generally? You think using AI voices of deceased people is okay, or should that be prohibited?
It's actually a really, just not talking legally for a second, it was actually a really big deal that he did this, because so Kendrick is from Compton, okay, in California. He's like West Coast rapper. Drake is from Toronto, okay,
right,
Canada. Yeah. And him using Tupac's voice when Tupac never in a million years would have been on a song with Drake in this way was seen as really disrespectful. And the estate of Tupac was super upset with it too. That's why they made him take it down.
So we have some culture clashing here that are beyond my expertise in the law.
Sure.
This happened with George Carlin as well. We did another show, and these podcasters used AI to create a George Carlin voice to do stand-up comedy. The George Carlin piece was funny, but George Carlin's estate sued the podcasters for copyright infringement, derivative works, things like that. In this case, the estate of Tupac sent a cease and desist letter to Drake to take the song down. And I think the song has since been taken down.
You can still find it, but yes.
Yeah. So this has sparked some proposed legislation in Congress, and we've got the No Fakes. And the lawmakers are considering introducing this act. It basically is going to require explicit consent from estates to use the image and likeness and the voice. So if you think about your digital assets after you die, when I pass away, all of my podcasts and all of my videos and YouTube will be digital assets of my estate. Now, I don't know that they'll be worth very much. Okay. I doubt they'll be worth near as much as Tupac's voice, but this No Fakes Act will clearly require consent to be able to use the deceased person's voice. Now, whether that passes, I don't know. If the Congress doesn't pass that act, then we're relying on the courts to make the law in new territory or use the law in the books to interpret and apply that law, most of it copyright law, to AI. And we get into just unauthorized use. You can't use a dead person's voice. We get into derivative works. Like, it's obvious if you have a song out there, someone makes a song, you can't just go remix it. That's a derivative work. That's likely a copyright violation. So by using AI to recreate Tupac's voice, are you in fact sort of remixing his voice? And that's a derivative work in violation of copyright. So you may not need a congressional act. The law may be able to handle it on its own, but if Congress does pass this No Fakes Act, then that's going to kind of govern and require consent, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Some interesting tidbits about this. The song title is Tailor Made Freestyle. And as you mentioned, it's about this feuding. It's called a diss track, and he's feuding with this Kendrick Lamar. But I've got some lyrics here, and I want everyone to know the lyrics. I'm going to read the lyrics. If you're lucky, I may even rap the lyrics for you, Austin. And I want you to tell our listeners what this means, okay? This girl really about to make you act like you not in a feud. She tailor-made. You scheduled with Ant. You out of the loop. Hate all you corporate industry puppets. I'm not in the mood. We have any idea what that means?
So I think this may be talking about an issue, like going back to, I think it was Nicki Minaj was like shot in like the foot by someone. I think this may be going back to that.
Right.
I'm not certain, but I think the tailor-made is obviously a double entendre there, right?
What I'm hearing is we are so confused. Like
I don't know who Ant is. I think this is referring to this because a lot of people thought that this started with Kendrick making a song with Future and Metro Boomin, where he came back to something that Drake had said. Drake and J. Cole had said about him, Drake, and J. Cole being the big three. And Kendrick came back and said, it's not big three, it's just big me, right? And everyone started there. So, but I don't think
I'm cutting this off because this is a legal podcast. And I think what's going on is Drake is implying that Kendrick Lamar somehow has to ask Taylor Swift's permission as to when to release his album. And then the big corporate record producers are orchestrating all of this for money. I think that's some of the reference what's going on here, but I don't exactly know. I think we've absolutely nailed this one. There are no two lawyers in the country more qualified than to handle that news piece.
Absolutely not.
Than us. But let's move on to our legal questions section now, okay? And we're not criminal lawyers, but this one was just too interesting to pass up. Are cops legally allowed to lie to you? What's the answer?
In general, they can. It does depend on some things, but in general, they can. Yes.
And that blows my mind because I'm a kid that grew up like in the 80s and 90s, and we had this DARE thing, drug awareness resistant something, but it was like all this stuff not to do drugs. And it was always, as kids, we were told, if you're ever lost, go run and find a police officer. It really bothers me that police officers can lie to people. So I just don't think that's right. But apparently, in general, police officers are allowed, and during interrogations, it's a common practice to lie to the person you're interrogating to try to get a confession. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case on this, and the case is Frazier v. Cupp in 1969. What happened was Martin Frazier was a Marine, and he was accused of murdering another man, and there was an accomplice. His cousin was the accomplice to the murder. And the cops or the police or the detectives out there are basically saying, hey, your cousin already confessed on this deal. And that wasn't true. The cousin actually never confessed. So he was put under pressure to confess because the cousin already confessed.
It usually plays out in the scenario, right? Oh, he confessed and he's going to testify against you. It's going to go much worse for you if you don't confess also, that sort of thing. Yeah.
I'm a little worried that you know about that.
I listen to a lot of crime podcasts, and so I actually hear these interviews that they do with these people when they say these things. So, yeah.
Okay, that's exactly what happened. So they have the trial, and they get the confession into evidence. So Martin Frazier's confession is brought into evidence. The prosecutor is like, he confessed. Here's the confession. And then the defense, Martin Frazier's defense, tries to get that thrown out. And the Supreme Court rules on it. And the Supreme Court of the United States says the fact the police misrepresented the statements that Rawls, that's his cousin, had made is, while relevant, insufficient in our view to make this otherwise a voluntary confession inadmissible. So there you have it. This the way the courts work and the way the Supreme Court works, appellate courts work, they very rarely make bright line rules. So this was like, generally speaking, we're going to allow those kinds of those confessions to be admissible when the cops are lying to you. There are some limits. The Supreme Court has said, and the courts have said, you can go too far. Like when you start making up documents and you start forging documents and making up evidence, that's too far. You can't do that. That's going to be inadmissible. And the courts have also said minors or people with mental disabilities, you can't manipulate and lie to a minor the same way you can lie to an adult. So the courts have been a little bit more restrictive with cops lying to minors. I do with my 14 all the time. When my 14-year-old screws up, I'm like, now, Gabe, I know you did this. Okay. I've got the evidence to prove that you did this or whatever. So if you confess, then my punishment will be easier on you. Right. And sometimes I have the evidence and sometimes I don't.
It doesn't matter because Gabe doesn't listen to this, right?
He has some friends that listen to the show.
All that to be said, if you are being interviewed by police officers in relation to a crime, hire a lawyer, okay? Hire a lawyer,
that was the thing. Yeah, always they'll say to me, I want to talk to my lawyer. That's what, and I think he did.
Yeah.
I think the Marine did ask to speak to his lawyer. And absolutely, if you're ever accused, interrogated, immediately get a lawyer. Don't say anything until I talk to my lawyer.
And the police officers will say things about making you look guilty. Get a lawyer.
Yeah. All right. In a completely unrelated legal question, can you sue your spouse for partition? Tell us basically what partition is first, Austin.
Partition is when two or more people own a property together. Let's say it's just a small piece of land with a house on it. And one person wants to sell the property. The other person doesn't want to sell the property. They want to live in the property. And they also don't want to buy out the other person's interest who wants to sell it. So partition is when the person who wants to sell the property sues the other person in court to force a sale of the property and to take their equity out of it from the sale.
Yeah. And you've got partitions between co-owners that want to divide up the property. You've got partition in kind, which is you actually physically divide up the property. That's the preference. That really only works with like plots of land. And then you've got partition by sale where the court's just going to sell it. And that's more like a subdivision home. You can't divide up a subdivision home very easily. You can't just saw it down the middle. Okay. Although I did have a guy call me up, Austin. He called me up. He said, Mr. Silberman, I want to do a partition with my wife. And I said, that doesn't really work very well. You can't really do that. I said, if that's what it comes to with your wife, unfortunately, the proper procedure is a divorce proceeding, and all that's handled in the family court. So no, I don't want to divorce my wife. It's just that she wants to renovate and remodel the house, and I don't want to pay for it. So here's my idea. I'm going to partition the house, and I want to let her renovate half of the house, and then my half of the house will be unrenovated. So that way she can take her money and spend her money on renovating the house. And I'm just fine with my half of the house. And he actually wanted to put a curtain right down the middle of the house. And I said, Mr. Smith, that's about the funniest thing I've heard. And I empathize with the guy. Okay. Because my wife has proposed some very expensive renovations to my home. I empathize with that, but that's not the way it works. And generally speaking, you cannot partition properties among spouses. That really needs to happen in the family law court, the marital property, community property. The divorce court has jurisdiction over that. And that's under Texas Family Code 9.201. It governs the division of community property. That's where that properly needs to take place. You can do a post-divorce partition, right? Because sometimes you have property and maybe the court awards half to you, half to the spouse, or you come out of the divorce and you're both owning the property and then you're no longer married. And then you file a regular partition action. That's really no different than unrelated people that own the property. So yes, you can do a post-divorce partition, but while you're married, the division of marital property assets needs to happen at the divorce court is what that has to take place there. So Austin, I know you're not married yet, but keep all of those things in your mind as you're considering getting married and whether you'll ever want to partition your property.
Yeah. If I ever want to call it curtains, right?
I do enjoy a good pun. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our rant and rave section today. And my favorite part of the show, 156 people got the name of an NBA backup tattooed on their bodies. The Minnesota Timberwolves have been historically bad for a very long time. I don't think they've ever won a first round playoff series. I think that's right, but they've been bad. And they're in the playoffs and they won their first round. And now they're moving into their second round. And at the recording of this show, they are currently tied 3-3. That's 3 games apiece against the Denver Nuggets. They play a 7-game series, so the winner of the next game will determine whether the Minnesota Timberwolves move on to the third round of the playoffs. This is a big deal in Minnesota because they've been bad for so long. So everyone's excited. And this one guy who's a tattoo artist, he's so excited. He sends out a tweet or an X or whatever you call it and they say, hey, if anybody is willing to get the name Nas Reed tattooed on their arm, we'll do it for a super good deal of $20. And 156 people, including this guy's mother, signed up to get Nas Reed tattooed on their bodies. Now, Nas Reed, he's not even a starter. He's a 6th man. And they asked the tattoo artist, like, why Nas Reed? And part of the tattoo artist's answer was he had a really short name and I couldn't afford to tattoo anybody with a long name for more than $20. Austin, do you have any tattoos?
I do not. I will thank my mother for that fact. Being very involved with church, youth group, all the worship leaders of the youth group have some sort of like Hebrew tattooed on their chest or arm or something like that. I wanted something like that as well. And I'm so glad I didn't do that.
That's interesting because I grew up Jewish and in Leviticus, but It's do not cut your bodies and do not tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. So I'm fascinated that there's a bunch of Gentile youth pastors that are tattooing themselves with Hebrew characters. So no tattoos, and great deal. If you want a Nas Reed tattoo, $20 because, and I looked it up, the average cost of a 2 to 4 inch small tattoo is actually between $50 and $250. So this $20 is a killer deal. All right. But I'm going to tell you, this is my rant. Okay. This is just so stupid. People don't go out and get tattoos on a lark. Don't do this. Yeah. We have some examples of some really stupid tattoos.
Very famous one that I think most people have seen. It was a meme a while ago. The guy going right below his collarbone that said no regrets, but it was spelled no regrets. And I think he meant to say no regrets. Yeah.
I got you. But that actually wasn't the fault of the guy. That was just a bad tattoo artist.
That was a bad tattoo artist, I think, unless the dude wrote down what he wanted written on his chest. I don't know the full story.
So the irony, the regret was selecting a tattoo artist that couldn't read or write, probably. Yeah. What else do we have for stupid?
A barcode tattoo that could be scanned. I think I saw one time someone with a barcode tattoo that when you scanned it, it came out as spam from Walmart. I don't recommend doing that one. It sounds pretty dumb to me. Oh, and then some people get Spotify code tattooed on their arm because you can scan it with your phone and the song comes up or something like that. Sounds kind of dumb as well.
Yeah, so if they go to scan it later, then they're not going to be able to actually scan it because they fade. And then celebrity faces, like you get a face tattooed, but then you age and your skin sags and then you can't recognize a celebrity anymore. So
exactly. Drake has a tattoo of Lil Wayne on his face.
Dude, there are a lot of stupid tattoos out there. I don't recommend tattoos, period. If you have one and you want to get it removed and you really regret it, then, regret it, right? The cost to remove a tattoo, and they're saying, I guess they do it by several sessions. You go to these repeat sessions. It's $200 to $500 per session, multiple sessions. It's probably painful. If you have a larger tattoo, it can cost thousands of dollars. So this is expensive stuff. And the success rate of tattoo removal varies. I guess it depends on how much color ink you are, maybe your skin pigmentation. The technology and the techniques have gotten better, but it's challenging. So this isn't something you really want to take lightly when you're getting a tattoo. And this statistic kind of blew me away. Do you have the percentage of Americans with tattoos, Austin?
32% of Americans have at least one tattoo.
Were you surprised by how high that number was?
Actually, no. I don't think I'm surprised by that. Probably would have guessed around that number. Yeah.
Okay. That seems like an incredibly high number. And there's a whole lot more in Minnesota right now that have Nas Reed tattooed on their arm. So I don't know if the Timberwolves are going to win and how far they're going to go, but T-Wolves fans out there, more power to you, especially if you got those Nas Reed tattoos. I just don't see that being something you're going to like in 20, 30, 40 years. So everyone out there, be careful with what tattoos you're selecting. That brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silberman. Austin Black has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com, info@silb, S-I-L-B like boy, lawfirm.com. Tell us you want your question answered publicly in the podcast, and we will take a stab at it. Thank you for everyone listening. Have a great week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.